Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of your life, looking at the future you've always dreamed of, but the very people you trust, the ones who should support and protect you, suddenly force you into a corner where there's no escape. No matter what you choose, your life will never be the same again. Now, ask yourself, how far will you go to save your marriage, to save your family? What happens when the price for that is far higher than you ever expected? This is Lissa, a young woman who is forced into a decision that no one should ever have to make. Her dreams, her future, her sense of safety shattered by a secret that would haunt her for the rest of her life. In today's video, we will uncover the events that led to Lissa being coerced into a situation that no one should ever experience, an impossible choice made under the pressure of her family's dark secrets. The question is, what drives a family to cross such an unforgivable line? How does a woman fight to regain control of her life when everything she thought she knew about love and loyalty has been destroyed? This story is not just one of horror, but a cautionary tale, a reminder of the depths to which some will go when power, control, and desperation cloud their judgment. Stay with us as we unravel the twists and turns that led to Lissa's heart-wrenching reality and discover how she fought back against the force that tried to control her future. Lissa was only 23 years old when her life was upended by the weight of family expectations. A bright, hopeful young woman with a passion for teaching, she dreamed of inspiring children and making a difference in the world. She imagined a future filled with possibilities until the day her parents made a decision for her that would change everything. Growing up, Lissa was known for her curiosity and drive. She was deeply family-oriented, always eager to support those she loved, but despite her strong will and ambition, she found herself trapped by tradition. Lissa's parents, deeply rooted in the customs of their village, believed that a woman's worth was defined by her marriage. They chose for her a future she had not planned, a future bound by a decision that was made before she even had a say. It was the village's belief that marriage was the foundation of a woman's life, her security, her role in the community. For Lissa, it meant accepting the match her parents had arranged, even though she had never truly known James, the man she was to marry. They told her he was the perfect match, a kind, respectable man from one of the most prominent families in the village. His status alone would have ensured that Lissa would be set for life. James, though charming and polite, was not the man Lissa had envisioned. He was 5 years older, quiet, and reserved. But Lissa, trusting her parents' judgment and believing she would come to love him, agreed to the marriage. She thought that time would allow her to build a connection, even if the bond wasn't there at first. Yet from the very beginning, there were cracks in the marriage. James, despite his good nature, struggled with a secret of his own, one that he had kept hidden from Lissa. He had been diagnosed with infertility, something he could not overcome, something he was too ashamed to share. Though Lissa was unaware of this when they wed, the truth slowly began to surface. The couple had tried to conceive, but nothing happened. James grew distant, and his frustration began to seep into their marriage. As Lissa's hopes of starting a family faded, so did her joy. She began to feel isolated in the marriage, unable to talk to James about the strain she felt, but she never suspected the devastating truth about the lengths to which his family would go to save their union. Behind closed doors, James's parents, particularly his father, took a darker view of their son's infertility. The pressure to maintain their family's legacy, to have an heir, weighed heavily on the family's shoulders. The idea of an unbroken bloodline was more than a tradition. It was a matter of survival in their eyes. As James and Lissa's marriage began to crumble under the weight of infertility, it wasn't just their relationship that was on the line, it was the reputation of the entire family. And that, in the eyes of James's father, was unacceptable. But what Lissa didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that the solution James's family had in mind would plunge her into a nightmare beyond her worst fears. This was the moment the nightmare began, when the innocent expectations of a young woman collided with a world of secrets and unspoken demands. Behind the picturesque image of a happy marriage lay a man whose influence would soon cast a dark shadow over Lissa's life. James's father, a figure revered in their small village, carried a weight of power that stretched beyond the boundaries of his own household. His word was law. As the patriarch, his role in the family was unquestioned, but what lay beneath his respectable exterior was a mind determined to ensure his family's survival and legacy at any cost. James's father was a man consumed by tradition, obsessed with the preservation of his lineage. His thoughts on marriage and family were rooted in a singular belief: the continuation of the family name and honor was paramount. For him, the inability to bear children was not simply a medical issue, it was a failure, a blemish on the family's reputation. And when James's infertility became evident, the pressure on Lissa intensified. The responsibility of carrying on the family's legacy fell squarely on her shoulders, but the path to achieving this wasn't as simple as it seemed. Lissa, though a part of this world, was naive to the immense weight of what her in-laws expected. What she thought would be a quiet, typical family life soon revealed itself to be a battleground for control and manipulation. She was never prepared for the dark proposition that would come from the very man who was supposed to be a protector, a guide. One evening, as the tension in the house grew unbearable, James's father made his intentions known. The proposal came not in the form of an offer, but as an ultimatum. Lissa never imagined her father-in-law would ask her to do something so unfathomable. It began as a suggestion, a whisper in the silence of their home. "You need to bear a child for this family, Lissa. You need to save us all." At first, Lissa thought it was a bad joke, a cruel misstep from a man who had always seemed so composed. But the weight of his words lingered, and soon it became clear he wasn't asking, he was demanding. The idea, once unimaginable, began to take root. Lissa's resistance was met with cold logic and manipulation. Her duty to the family, her role as a wife, and the survival of James's lineage were all things she had no choice but to consider. The pressure was suffocating. Lissa realized that to refuse would not only destroy her marriage, but could ruin her entire life. Her own dreams, her sense of self, and her autonomy hung by a fragile thread. The proposal was no longer a suggestion, it was a trap, designed to corner her. And as the days wore on, the walls seemed to close in, with no escape. The emotional manipulation, the guilt, and the constant reminders of what was at stake, the family's honor, the preservation of their name, and James's reputation slowly chipped away at Lissa's resistance. She was left with no real options, no real choices. What began as a horrific suggestion now seemed to be the only way out. The darkest part of the nightmare had begun to unfold. Lissa felt as though she was suffocating. Each day, the walls of her world seemed to close in around her. The pressure from her family, particularly her father-in-law, weighed heavily on her conscience. Torn between the love and respect she had for James and the unthinkable demand from his father, she was paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. Her mind was a battlefield where the voice of reason clashed with the forceful demands of those she was supposed to trust. How could she reconcile this dark request with her own sense of right and wrong? Every time she looked at James, she saw a man she loved, yet a man who would never be able to give her the family they both longed for. But the thought of betraying him, betraying their vows, felt like a wound too deep to heal. How could she live with herself, knowing that to fulfill this one demand, she might lose everything she had once held dear? Days passed, but the pressure only grew stronger. Her father-in-law's influence was undeniable. He was a master of manipulation, carefully working his way into her thoughts, slowly convincing her that her only option was to comply. Each conversation with him felt like an assault on her willpower, his words cutting through her defenses like a knife. With every passing moment, Lissa's internal conflict deepened. The man she had married, the man she was supposed to trust, was the one person she could not turn to for help. James, despite his kindness, could never understand the suffocating grip his father held over their lives. Lissa began to feel trapped in a cage of her own making, a cage that slowly closed tighter with each passing day. The thought of defying her father-in-law was almost impossible. He had so much power over her, over their lives. His control expanded beyond just the family home. It was woven into the fabric of their village, where his reputation and standing were untouchable. How could she challenge someone who had held such power for so long? What would happen if she resisted? Would she be ostracized? Would she lose her marriage? But the emotional toll was growing too great to ignore. The guilt, the shame, and the fear of losing herself consumed her. Every night, as she lay in bed beside James, she questioned whether she was still the woman she once was. Could she ever reclaim her sense of dignity? Was it already too late to escape the emotional maze her life had become? And then, one evening, the proposition was laid bare. Lissa's father-in-law made his demands clear, with chilling precision. "If you want a child, this is the only way," he told her, his gaze unwavering. "This is the only way we can save the family's name, save James's pride, and give you what you both deserve." The words echoed in her mind like a dark omen. This was no longer a conversation, it was an ultimatum. Her future, her morals, and her sense of self hung in the balance. In that moment, Lissa knew that her decision would define the course of the rest of her life, for better. What followed was a moment that would haunt Lissa for the rest of her life. What she had hoped would remain an impossible request, something too unthinkable to consider, became the dark reality she was forced to face. The pressure from her father-in-law had escalated to a point where, in her desperation to preserve her marriage, Lissa saw no way out. Lissa entered a room that day not knowing that her life, her sense of self, and the trust she had once shared with her husband would be irrevocably shattered. Every step she took, every word spoken, seemed to blur into a surreal haze. She couldn't fully comprehend what was happening. Her mind screamed in protest, but her body remained frozen, driven by a force she couldn't escape. It was a violation, not just of her body, but of the sanctity of the bonds that held her world together. The betrayal would never be undone. When it ended, Lissa felt a cold emptiness settle within her. The guilt, like an anchor, pulled her deeper into despair. The confusion was overwhelming. How could she have allowed this to happen? What kind of person had she become? Every moment since had been an agonizing blur. There was no relief, no comfort, only the crushing weight of what she had done. Lissa couldn't escape the image of James, the man she had promised to love and cherish. How could she look him in the eye again, knowing what had transpired? The promise she had made to him, the vows they had exchanged, felt like a distant memory, now tainted by a darkness she couldn't shake. Would he ever understand? Would he even want to? The house felt colder now. Every corner, every room, echoed with the silence of her own despair. Her father-in-law's words haunted her, repeating in her mind over and over, "Do this for the family, do this for James." And yet, in fulfilling those demands, Lissa had lost pieces of herself, pieces she feared she could never recover. Her heart screamed for answers, for a way out of the labyrinth of guilt and shame she was now trapped in. But with every passing moment, Lissa knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same. The weight of what had transpired settled heavily on Lissa's chest. Each day the secret gnawed at her, sinking deeper into her conscience. She had betrayed her own sense of self, her marriage, and the love she once believed was unbreakable. Now, as the days passed, a new fear took root. Should she tell James the truth? Or should she keep silent, preserving the fragile peace she had left? Every decision felt like a knife to her soul, but revealing the truth meant losing everything she had worked so hard to protect. Could she live with herself knowing that her silence was built on a lie? Lissa chose silence. The burden was unbearable, but her fear of losing James outweighed everything else. The longer she kept the secret, the harder it became to face him, to look into his eyes without feeling like a stranger to herself. She could barely look at him without feeling the suffocating guilt creeping in. But it wasn't just the lie. Her entire existence began to fracture. Every moment of peace was fleeting because the truth was like a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. Then, something unexpected happened. Lissa became pregnant. At first, the news was a relief. Perhaps the family's problems would finally be solved. James was overjoyed, his excitement about becoming a father palpable. He couldn't believe the dream they had both shared was finally coming true. Yet with every smile he gave, every hug he shared, Lissa felt more trapped in her own deception. As her pregnancy progressed, the weight of her silence became unbearable. Could she ever confess the truth to James? How could she look at him, knowing that the child they both longed for was the result of something so painful, so wrong? She wondered whether their marriage could survive the revelation, or if, in one moment, everything they had built would crumble into dust. The days of silence had taken their toll. The weight of the secret, festering within Lissa, became impossible to bear. The guilt was suffocating. It wasn't just her actions that haunted her. It was the lie she had woven, the trust she had broken, and the fear that, eventually, the truth would surface. She knew that hiding it would destroy everything, but confronting the reality meant risking it all. The truth had to be told. One evening, after months of turmoil, Lissa found herself standing before James, her heart pounding in her chest. She opened her mouth, the words stuck in her throat, and for a moment she questioned everything. But there was no turning back. She had to face the man she loved, knowing the weight of what she had to confess. "I can't keep this from you anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "James, the child we're expecting, it's not yours, it's your father's." The world shifted beneath them. James stood motionless, his face drained of color as the words cut through the silence. The betrayal hit him like a freight train, knocking the breath from his lungs. He couldn't process it, couldn't fathom the enormity of what he had just heard. His father's manipulations now took on a new, horrifying dimension. But it wasn't just the father's cruelty that devastated him. It was the realization that the woman he loved had kept this dark secret from him. His emotions exploded, the pain too raw to contain. Anger, disbelief, and a deep, gut-wrenching sorrow tore through him. "How could you?" His voice cracked, the betrayal from the one person he trusted most, his wife, cutting deeper than he could bear. The grief of his infertility, which he had kept hidden, now felt like an overwhelming weight he could no longer ignore. James's trust had been shattered. His anger was not only directed at his father for manipulating his wife, but also at Lissa for not confiding in him, for allowing the lie to grow and fester between them. The foundation of their marriage, once built on love and hope, now lay in ruins. The silence that followed was unbearable. Lissa, devastated by her own actions, could hardly look at him. She had never imagined her confession would shatter the man she had promised to stand by. But she could see it in his eyes. The damage was irreversible. And though he may have wanted to understand, the truth was too much to reconcile. In the wake of the confession, Lissa was left alone with the overwhelming consequences of her actions. The truth had shattered the delicate balance she had so desperately tried to preserve. James, broken by the revelation, could hardly comprehend the betrayal that had come from the woman he had trusted most. The grief in his eyes was palpable, but so was the silence between them. The foundation of their marriage had crumbled, and no amount of words could rebuild it. Lissa, torn between love and guilt, understood now that her life would never be the same. The child she was carrying, meant to save the family's name, had come to symbolize a haunting chapter of betrayal. But in the quiet moments, away from the accusations and anger, Lissa reflected on what had happened. She thought about the decision that had altered the course of her life and wondered if there was any way to ever atone for the choices she had made. She had borne a child, but it was never just about bringing life into the world. It was about survival, about doing whatever it took to preserve the life she thought she wanted. But in the end, the choices we make are the ones that shape us forever. Lissa knew that her actions had irrevocably changed her. reshaped her view of family, loyalty, and trust. The family's dark secret had become her own. But how could she ever escape it? As time went on, Lissa continued to grapple with the emotional aftermath of her decision. The consequences, both emotional and psychological, would follow her for years to come. The child, now part of the family's future, would forever carry the weight of that dark history. This story leaves us with a difficult question. What would you do if faced with an unimaginable choice that could break everything you love? Would you sacrifice your own morals to protect the family you've been given? Or would you risk everything to hold on to your integrity? We want to hear your thoughts. How far would you go to protect the ones you love? And what is the price of a decision that seems to have no right answer? Leave your comments below, and if you found this story compelling, make sure to like and subscribe for more in-depth true crime investigations.